This is Black history. Like, it's so much of who's who of Black America.
But people don't visit here.
No, they don't visit here because they don't know the history.
On a rainy day. Note to self, stop scheduling on-location outdoor shoots on rainy days. I met up with Dr. Cami Fletcher, the president of the Collective for Radical Death Studies and historian of American and African American history. We were here to visit Baltimore's historic Mount Auburn Cemetery, the subject of her research. The restoration of the cemetery, in just the little over 10 years she's been coming here, has been significant.
Oh my goodness, Caitlin. It was just completely overgrown. This is amazing. You know, I can see all the way back to the church, which is Sharp Street. The first 13 families started Mount Winans Church. Like, this wasn't cleared out, that you can see this far. Like, they have really, over the past decade, made a serious concerted effort, and that's got to be with the city and stuff.
Mount Auburn is the oldest owned and operated Black burial ground in Baltimore. Owned and operated. Those words are important and will likely provide the answer to the question posed by this video, which is, why are Black cemeteries and Black funeral homes still so often separate in the United States? We're looking not just at the history of Black cemeteries and funeral homes, but how these places created the foundation of Black independence, Black wealth building, and civil rights in America. During slavery, Black people almost never had access to being properly buried or properly mourned. That's why the very first independent Black cemeteries were such a revolution. It was access to not just a burial, but a headstone that states, here lies a person, a name, someone with family and history.
This is where, Black folks filled out their genealogical tree right here. Before the Civil War, you were somebody's slave or, wench or, a number. You were only, a piece of property when you look at these records. But in the burial ground, you can see somebody's name, approximate age, husband of, mother of, and the grouping. These literal family groupings, like, oh, this must be the son or the daughter. So, Black people use death to claim humanity. Where were you going to be buried? Unless you were just on, the side of the road or, the side of some body of water. But here you could be buried in dignity. So important to be properly buried for Black folks.
You saw the same thing happening with funeral homes that you saw with cemeteries. Understand that after the Civil War, white funeral homes would take Black families, because at the end of the day, they were a business that wanted the money. But the families and their dead loved ones were treated as second, third, fourth-class citizens. The bodies were rolled through the back basement door. The funeral was shameful, and the white funeral home was not proud or honored to be helping. And so Black people found themselves in a situation where they needed to open their own funeral homes. They needed economic independence. But of course, the economy at the time wasn't welcoming to Black entrepreneurship and business. Becoming a funeral director was one of the very few careers that presented this opportunity.
And that's the thing about when you look at undertakers, Black undertakers in the Reconstruction period. This was their way to go from agrarian and be a part of the cash economy. And Jim Crow insulated that in a very weird way, because white people did not want Black bodies. Black people were not going to go to white people. It's cultural. And even right now, Caitlin, in 2020, somebody Black dies. I'm not knowingly going to go to a white undertaker. They can't do our hair. They don't understand the skin tone. And there's this idea that we want to look like ourselves in death, because so much of our life is stereotyped. Even now, some Black person dies and they pull up some mug shot or something. We can never have humanity. But that Black undertaker is going to give us humanity.
How hard Black people had to fight for that humanity only amplified the importance of the funeral, and the lengths that people would go to see that things were properly done, that a person was cared for and mourned. If you've ever attended a black funeral, or even seen a black funeral on TV or in the media, you can probably pick up on some of the differences between that funeral and what we see more often in media, which is the stereotypical waspy funeral full of stoic mourners. A perfect example of this black funeral would be Aretha Franklin's 6-hour-long televised funeral event. At a glance, there was nothing subtle about this funeral. Long processions, music, singing, crying out, flowers everywhere, rejoicing. Franklin wore a different, elegant outfit for each of her 3 viewings. Linda Swanson of Swanson Funeral Home in Detroit, the funeral home that handled Franklin's service, said, "She's presented in a way that reflects her life and her legacy. She is, indeed, resplendent in repose, as a queen should be." For Queen Aretha, no expense was spared, and emotions ran high. But this goes against the more mainstream cultural portrayals of funerals as white funerals. This leads to assumptions about the way we mourn, that a proper funeral involves a stiff upper lip, a sorrowful dirge, and a solemn silence. A funeral that's over as quickly as possible and we don't look back. Yes, we talk about the diversity of funeral traditions here on this channel, but I would argue that for most Americans, their stereotypical understanding of a funeral involves a bunch of people in black suits trying not to cry. There can be people of different races at that funeral, in black suits, trying not to cry, but the funeral itself is still coded as a default American white funeral. That's why it's so easy, through either racism or misunderstanding, to dismiss the black funeral tradition. Funerals like Aretha Franklin's are rooted in the funeral rituals brought to America by enslaved Africans, largely West Africans, in the 17th century. A West African funeral started with the offering of libations, followed by a group of women washing the corpse. Sometimes the corpse would even be embalmed. The embalming was practical, not spiritual. African and African American funerals were not short affairs, so the body needed to stay in as good a shape as possible for what could be days or weeks. High rates of embalming in the black community continue to this day for this reason.
It takes a while for that to happen because everybody that knew this person that can piece up on something is coming. If you die Tuesday, that funeral might be on Saturday. But if you die Wednesday, that funeral's not going to be on Saturday. It's definitely going to be the next Saturday, period.
The body was then dressed in their best clothing and laid out for the public bewailment, the absolute best term, which means an outpouring of crying, lamentation, and wailing. This was the height of the funeral ritual. Mourners, accompanied by drumming, processed to the burial site, where they would dance around the grave in a ring shout. A few weeks, even a year later, the gravesite would be visited again for what was called a second burial. And this time there would be a sense of celebration. This second burial freed the dead from their confinement and sent them on to the world of spirits. The dead could now leave the place where they suffered and were enslaved and could go home to God and Africa, hence the term homegoing used in black funerals. So while you may see spectacle when you look at black funerals, that spectacle has not only deep spiritual meaning, but deep cultural meaning, an attempt to reclaim what was lost. At its core, the black funeral is about the confirmation of the person, the very same respect that history has given other cultures.
Archaeology, anthropology,
Absolutely.
it's here they were, here are their bodies,
Yeah.
here's what they used, here's how they were
Yeah.
ritualized, that shows their values.
Yeah.
It shows their whole system, and if you're enslaved, you're not allowed to display
Yeah.
your values in death. And through a
Yeah.
cemetery like this, you are. All
So
of a
true.
sudden.
So true, yeah. And there were enslaved and free people here. Just like with the church, there were enslaved and free people. And this was about, freedom and death. Only in a type of white supremacist society could you get freedom through death.
At this point, it was getting very cold and very damp at Mount Auburn, and while I could have spent hours in the cemetery walking through the graves, and let's be honest, deer watching, my thin West Coast skin just wouldn't let me. So Dr. Fletcher and I got into her car and went back to her home to continue our conversation. I wanted to pick up on something she had mentioned earlier about the ways that Black funerals came to represent a certain kind of finally available excess.
Once the economy opened up and Black people got access to material culture, we're going all out. I'm gonna have my horses, I'm gonna have my casket, I'm gonna have my flowers.
So my question was, I'm always talking about ways that capitalism has negatively impacted the funeral industry. But at the same time, when you learn about the history of early American Black death, capitalism was a saving grace.
Going back to the kind of first undertakers, men and women at the turn of the 20th century, these folks were able to take part of the cash economy. And what did they do with their capital? They didn't leave the community and go off and build mega mansions. They stayed and developed the community. White undertakers didn't want these bodies. They didn't want them during slavery. They just did not want this. It was only until they saw these burial societies, these benevolent societies, and the money, this green money that was coming in. So much so, again, my research in Baltimore, you had Black undertakers taking out newspaper ads saying, keep the funerals Black, the florists, the cemeteries, because these white undertakers are now trying to, just encroach in on this territory, that they still don't want. They're still sending you second-class service, in the back door, type thing, so.
Again, these are Black business people who owned and operated their own funeral homes. It was through those funeral homes that Black people were able to achieve significant wealth and power. Wealth that was independent of white people, and that was being used for the betterment of Black communities and Black economic growth. Black funeral directors in the late 19th and early 20th centuries were very often leaders in their community, beloved aspirational figures. They wore nice suits every day, they had beautiful carriages and then cars, and they kept elegant funeral homes. I wondered if this affected how the funeral directors thought of themselves.
I don't think they saw it as an honor. I think they saw it as this kind of self-help. Like, that was a big word in the early 20th century, being a race leader. You take care of the community, and how do you take care of the community? You take care of your dad.
Of course, a funeral director needs a cemetery in which to bury their dead in, and in times of slavery or segregation, that wasn't always easy.
You saw at Mount Auburn, these Black people able to own land. It might just be this small little piece, but it's my piece of land, and I can pass it on, to my children and children's children. So, in that way, the cemetery made thousands of Black landowners. How magical is that?
So, in many ways, this continued separation of Black funeral homes and cemeteries is positive. In the book Black Dixie, there's this quote about the businesses, barbershops, beauty salons, photographers, and funeral homes that are specifically oriented toward Black needs. And that's not a bad thing. But as we know, separate does not always mean equal. During Jim Crow, many cemeteries were segregated between Black people and white people. A lot of times the Black side of the cemetery was poorly maintained. And even now there are old segregated cemeteries where the white side of the cemetery is well manicured and the Black side is overgrown or in disrepair.
We all know that there were Jim Crow cemeteries. I mean, I'm talking public cemeteries with public city dollars that said here is for the white people, as if white people are, do dead people have a race, right? So, do you? I don't know. But they were serious about it, so much so that they put it in the charters. You cannot have Black blood, you cannot have African ancestry, and the list goes on and on.
And while Jim Crow has ended, in many places, its legacy endures.
Do you want to know what my latest one was? You'll never guess. You have to guess. That my latest Jim Crow cemetery.
Oh God,
what
was
date?
it like the 1990s?
94.
Oh.
This woman was 104, this African American woman, and they threatened her. And the language was, if you bury her, it's gonna be 2 funerals.
Black death continues to evolve into the 21st century with its own rituals and its own language. And now, as a scholar, Dr. Fletcher is living in the middle of these changes and can chronicle these things as they develop. Take, for example, RIP t-shirts.
When my nephew died tragically, I think 3 years ago this year, his sister just immediately, part of her calling me up was, what's your t-shirt size? Like, what, I got you a large, what size should I get my nephews? And this was the first time I had participated in this mourning ritual myself. I'd seen it, of course, had family members, that participated in it. And I wanted to understand it as a death scholar and also as someone that was actively participating in it. Is it a custom? Is it a ritual? Is it just a shirt? Like, is it just mourning wear, like the Victorians with locks of hair, And is it a part of this kind of larger, expressive mourning culture?
In a culture that often tries to reduce Black lives to a stereotype, Black funerals and grief continue to be important ways that the community pushes back. There is power in defiantly doing funerals your way, separating yourself from the mainstream even if white culture doesn't understand it. Death has been called the great equalizer, but for a lot of people, it continues to be the great divider.
How can we integrate in life if we can't integrate in death?
Thank you to Dr. Fletcher. The Order has now made 2 donations to her organization, the Collective for Radical Death Studies, because we believe that their goal of decolonizing academia and scholarship around death is a crucial one. This video was made with generous donations from death enthusiasts just like you.
Caitlin, like somewhere in DC, and I cannot track it down, so people out there, if you know the name of this cemetery, they had a segregated pet cemetery.
What does that mean?
If you are a white pet owner, your pet went to this cemetery. I'm so serious. Newspaper article.
I was like, dogs and cats?
No, racially.
A dog owned by a white person.
So serious about this. So very serious.
Black person's
about this.
Chihuahua here, white person's
very
golden
serious
retriever
about this.
here.
So it's rooted in something. If we cannot integrate pet cemeteries, where are we as a people?